Hello, and welcome to the Test Enhanced Learning Classroom Long-Term Improvements from Quizzing by Roediger III, Argwall, McDaniel, and McDermott. This research was supported by the grant to the Washington University in St. Louis from the Institute of Education Sciences and the U.S. Department of Education. The tests were performed at Columbia Community Unified Schools, District Number 4, sixth grade students and parents of 2006 and 2008. Repeated reading is a primary study habit of university students, which has been shown to be ineffective. This study looks at active retrieval, which would produce better retention than passive reading. There are various strategies to improve fact learning in the classroom. Studies that have been done for traditional approach to enhance learning and retention in the laboratory studies and by their extension to the classroom is to change study strategies. In laboratory studies, researchers emphasize organizational schemes and mental imagery. Surveys taken by university students show that when asked about their study strategies in preparing for tests, a great majority report reading text, underlining, or highlighting, and then reviewing the text again. Short answer tests and essay tests require effort retrieval from memory. Reading alone does not permit this type of retrieval. This paper looks for another way to effectively increase effective study strategy. The general hypothesis for this study is whether quizzes would enhance the final retention relative to control conditions that involve no quizzing of material or that involved rereading the material. These experiments examined whether quizzing promotes learning and retention of material from a social studies course with sixth grade students. The material used are the regular class materials that the school provided. Some of the dependent measures were the actual tests on which the students received grades. The goals of this paper is to find support for the general hypothesis by confirming the following. 1. Testing effects on free recall multiple choice chapter exams. Number 2, whether repeated quizzing would permit greater gains on the chapter exam relative to repeated studying, confirming that quizzing has benefits over and above restudying. And 3, if the students were permitted to test themselves outside of the class on the material, would the gains from self-testing add to the benefit of quizzes given in class? And 4, would benefits from retrieval practice extend to a final short answer exam? The methods of experiment 1. Participants: 142 sixth grade social studies students from a public school in Midwestern suburban middle-class community were chosen to participate. The procedures were 1. Pretest on each of the 4 chapters in the assigned social studies textbook. 2. The teacher conducts the lessons. And 3. There will be a post-test on that lesson. And 4. A review test a few days later. And 5. 2 days after the review test, a chapter exam was given to measure retention. Experiment 1, Methods and Analysis. The analysis, this is a subject within subject design study. Repeated measures ANOVA produced the main effect that was performed on the groups of quizzes. Experiment 1, Results. Results showed relatively consistent testing effects on exams given at the end of the chapters and at the end of the semesters. It also showed that reviewing material is advantageous. Here we have a chart that shows The initial quiz performance as function chapters and type of quiz in experiment 1. So you can see that there are 4 different topics. You have ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient India, ancient China, and then in the last column is the mean. You have the pre-test, post-test, and review test. In the parentheses is the standard deviations for each of these. The overall means have been weighted according to the number of items in the per chapter. So when you look at, for example, at ancient Egypt, you can see the pre-test is 0.42, the post-test was 0.91, and on the review test it was 0.95. So the pre-test was before the teacher taught, the post-test was after the teacher taught, and the review test was after some more time had gone by and there would be a review. The same is true with each of the subsequent chapters. We can see that the pretest was the lowest score. The post-test would be, in some cases, higher. And then the review test, in some cases, would be a little bit lower than the post-test. So that the retention was not as great, but these scores are still very good. On this slide, we have a further breakdown of the quizzes themselves. There was a free recall section and multiple choice, and then there were questions that were asked on the quiz that had not been included in the pretest. So it's what they call the non-tested. So you have the same 4 chapters, and you have the tested in the free recall, the tested and the non-tested questions. Then you have multiple choice questions that were part of the tested material and the non-tested material. And then at the end of the semester, you have broken out of that exam the questions that were tested and then the questions that were not tested. Meaning that not all of the material was in the quizzes that they had. So they left some of the information not quizzed on previously to see the difference between when they were quizzed on information before the test was taken and then the information they weren't quizzed on, what the relationship between those two were. And you can see in the free recall section they did really well on the tested material. They did not do as well on the non-tested, and in most cases it was pretty significant except for ancient China. For some reason they did better there. Um, then you can see on the multiple choice you have the tested and the non-tested, and in all of them they did much better on the tested material than on the non-tested. And then at the end of the semester, which was several weeks later, they were tested again. And you can see that they did pretty well on the tested material and not as well as the non-tested. In experiment number 2, the methods section, the participants, 142 sixth grade students, these are the same students that were in study 1, as well as 1 new student was added. The 3 chapters were assigned in the social studies textbooks were utilized. A read control was added for comparison with the tested and non-tested condition used in experiment 1, which meant that they had to read this material rather than have it presented to them. They were required to read. There was a pretest on each of the chapters, a post-test lesson, and a review test a few days later. 2 days after the review test, a chapter exam was given to measure retention, and an unexpected final exam was given at the end of the semester. This is experiment 2, the methods, analysis, and results. The analysis subject within subject design repeated measure ANOVA was performed. The test performance was greater for tested items than the read and non-tested items. The effects of quizzing on retention over and above reading in the classroom setting. This confirms a classroom study that many experiments have determined in the lab. Testing benefits later retention more than restudying. Performance did not differ significantly between the read and the non-tested items, and the benefits of quizzing disappeared at the end of the semester exam that occurred 3 to 5 months later. So here we have the results of the experiment number 2, the initial quiz performance as a function of chapter and type of quiz. In experiment 2, we have the pretest, the post-test, and the review test on the 3 different chapters, and the mean is in the final column to your right. So in the pretest, we see scores that are just a little bit below the halfway mark. The post-test, we see much higher scores. And now in the review test, we see better scores, except for when they studied Africa. Apparently they forgot a lot there. Um, and the mean is a little bit lower than I think they expected. This is a breakdown of the exams. Table 4, chapter and semester exam performance as a function of chapter, test format, and learning condition in experiment 2. Uh, for the chapter exam, it is broken out as the questions that they were tested on previously, the questions on material that they read, and then the questions that were not tested previously. So you have chapter examined, and then you have end of semester where you have the tested material, the read material, and the non-tested material. And you can see here that at the difference between the chapter exam test and the end of semester test, the grades really did drop off quite a bit. Their recall was not as great as the end of chapter exams. So this is where they show that the retention of the quizzing was really good when the testing was close together. But when you extended it out and did an end of the semester, the retention was not as great. Experiment 3 and the methods. The participants, 132 sixth grade social studies students from the same public middle school. The experiment was conducted in the fall following the academic year of the experiment number 1 and 2. And it was mentioned in the study that the parents gave written consent. So this is not the same group of students that was in the experiment 1 and 2. The procedures, there were 5 chapters that were used from the assigned social studies textbook. Pre-test before the teacher's presentation of the textbook information. Self-quizzing by students of tested items via the QIA web, which was encouraged and self-reported. The measure of retention, 8 lesson exams over a course of 5 chapters, and there was an end of semester exam. So this is experiment 3, analysis and results. The subject within subject design study, repeated measures ANOVA was performed. Several students were removed from the results based on attendance or the ability to have internet access at their home. Substantial testing effects were obtained on multiple choice and short answer chapter exams following pre-testing and self-quizzing. Significant testing effect for multiple choice chapter exam items persisted until the end of the semester for the students who self-reported using the website and the students who did not use the website. Students who used the website scored lower than those who did not. So here we have a breakout table of the results of experiment 3. We have chapter exam and MC equals multiple choice. Essay is for short answer. So you have tested and non-tested material on both of these different types of exams. And we have 5 different chapters that they were tested on. So you can see in general the tested material they scored higher on than the ones that were not previously tested on. They didn't break out in here uh, which students did this self-quizzing on the website. Because it was self-reported, it was done at the end of the semester. This table, experiment 3 results, is the end of semester test. The one previous was chapter test, this one's end of semester. And you can see that the scores are relatively lower than the end of chapter test, which shows that the retention after a couple of weeks is lower than at the end of the chapter. The retention is not, the information has not been held as well. So in conclusion, experiment 1 showed that 3 quizzes with feedback produced greater performance on chapter exams and on the end of semester exams. And then substantial testing effects were obtained on multiple choice and short answer chapter exams following pre-testing and self-quizzing. Number 3, significant testing effects for multiple choice chapter exam items persisted until the end of the semester for students who self-reported using the website and students who did not use the website. And number 4, students who used the website scored lower than those who did not. So limitations. The effects were not large, around 10% on a chapter test, and testing effects were diminished when re-examined students' knowledge and performance at the end of the semester on material they had learned earlier. And there were questions about whether they were teaching to the test. The same questions that were asked on the quizzes were also on the final test. So they were basically teaching to the test, which would ensure higher grades on the quiz material. On this final slide, I wanted to give a little bit of my thoughts. The paper does not say that for the first 2 experiments that parental permission for participation in the study was sought. It was stated only for experiment number 3. And in the results for the experiment, the researchers stated that the fact that students who used the website scored lower than those who did not may suggest that less able students used the website in an attempt to improve their performance. That's what they were supposed to do. Whether they were less able or more able, it doesn't matter. They were all supposed to use the website to improve their performance. So I found it strange that they would report in their conclusion that most students availed themselves of this opportunity, and a significant, if modest, correlation showed that students who reported greater use of the website showed larger gains from testing, which is strange because they said earlier in their reporting that the students who used the website scored lower. So this is a contradiction that I don't quite understand why the researchers have said this. And it's also unfortunate that in experiment 3, they did not use the same students that were in experiment 1 and 2. And also in experiment 3, they did not have any monitoring to show who used the website and how long they used it. The website was self-reported by the student. And I think that sixth grade students may not be the best self reporters. They didn't have parents sign off on anything to verify the student's use. And then there's also the question that students had adequate equipment at home, whether it be internet or computers, to really be able to access and use the games that they had put on there to help them with their facts. Thank you for listening.